Hey, Mosaic, I'm so excited you're here today. We are kicking off a brand new series called Spectacles. And here's what it's about. When you read the biographies of Jesus in the Bible, you see over and over he encounters individuals that society would label as outcasts or misfits. But Jesus sees them for who they are created to be. He loves them, he serves them, he talks to them, and he brings out God's purpose in their life. And we're going to learn how we can be like Jesus in this series and love people well. Today I'm real excited because you get to hear from my friend Chuck Mingo. Back in January, I had the privilege of visiting his church in Cincinnati. It's called Crossroads. And Chuck is a pastor down there. Chuck is a great dad. Chuck is a dedicated husband. Chuck used to work as an executive at Procter & Gamble. He was attending Crossroads Church at the time, but he felt like God was saying to him, hey, you've been serving me in this way. Now I want you to serve me in this way. And he started working at his church. Now he's on the regular speaking team there. And Chuck and I have texted some, talked on the phone, and he's really helped me personally grow as not just a leader, but as a follower of Christ. So I said, I've got to let my church hear and learn from Chuck Mingo. So what we did is Chuck preached a sermon back in January at his church as part of a series they did called How Not to Be a Jerk Face. And I love that. We may do that one day. But it fit in so well with what we were doing in Spectacles, we said, hey, we got to kick off this series with it. So I'm really excited. Get ready to take some good notes because we're going to learn how to love people well today from my friend, Pastor Chuck Mingo.
So as we jump in today to get this superpower, I want to start with a question. Think about 2017. And I want you to think about when are the moments in 2017 where you felt most like the person you want to be? When you felt most like the person you want to be. I had some moments like that in 2017, but two that rise to the surface for sure are these. One happened in a police car, and the other happened around a dinner table. And I'll tell you more about those a little bit later. But I want to sound the alarm today. The reason I want to talk to you about this superpower, I actually believe that what I'm talking about today is perhaps one of the most important things I could be talking about here at the beginning of 2018. I think that I need to sound the alarm on this. We are losing, as individuals and as a society, we are losing one of the things that is essential to our humanity. We're losing it because it's an epic struggle not to go the way of the world. The Bible's very clear. Bible's very clear. There is a way of the world. The way the world operates is not the way God operates. And there is the way of the kingdom of God. And one of the things that increasingly is the way of the world is this. It's our selfie culture. It's our selfie culture. Now, I'm not railing on smartphones today, so you can relax. But what I am saying is I think this right here is symbolic of something that we deeply struggle with, all of us struggle with, and it threatens to come against one of the things that makes us human. We live in a selfie culture where everything is about us. And more, we are losing the ability to think about, to serve, to actually be about people other than ourselves. And I'm telling you, that is one of the things that makes us human. Makes us human. In fact, let me just step back and say, something happened today, and if you haven't heard about it, you might be hearing about it first here. Not to be a jerk face, but this is one of those moments when somebody was maybe not as focused on others as they should have been. So I don't know if you heard this or not. We've all had somebody pull the fire alarm when we were in college. This is like that times a million. So if you didn't hear coming out of Hawaii today, I guess at a shift change at the emergency services place, like the places that send out your Amber Alerts, somebody accidentally pressed a button and sent this text to the entire state of Hawaii. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. That accidentally went out to the entire state of Hawaii today. Talk about bad timing. Talk about bad timing. Not to be a jerk face, but I don't know. Maybe it should take 2 buttons to press that, not one. Like maybe somebody else. I don't know. We've all had those moments. We've all had bad days like that. But more and more, we are struggling to think about others in our culture. Here's what one psychologist wrote. They said, if you need an American to do something, don't mention the common good, teamwork, or caring for others. A new study in psychological science this month found that trying to get Americans to think and act interdependently failed and may have even decreased motivation. Houston, we have a problem. That is not healthy for a culture. But what is the antidote to that? If that's the fight, if the fight is to be a selfie culture as opposed to an inclusive culture like we see God representing in the Bible and what he's called us to be as those of us who identify as being part of the church, what's the solution? In a word, it's empathy. It's empathy. So I am sounding the alarm for empathy today because empathy is essential to what it means to be human. And when I think about empathy and some of the great work that Brené Brown has done, I can't explain any better than she does what empathy means. So let's learn from her for a few minutes.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Empathy is so powerful. And I think it's one of the things that makes us essentially human, and I think it is desperately under attack. So for our purposes today, as I'm defining empathy, it's this. Empathy is listening to and feeling with people. It's choosing to listen to people, and it's choosing to feel with people, even when, and I would argue, especially when you disagree with people. Jesus said a lot of radical things. There are words of Jesus that have been debated for millennia. Words that he said that are debated in religious circles. Words that he said that are debated in social circles. Words that he said that are debated in political circles. And yet, of all of the words of Jesus, I believe there are 3 words he spoke that are the most radical words he could have ever spoken. And we find them in Matthew chapter 5:43, where he says, you have heard it, that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, and here come the 3 most radical words Jesus ever spoke, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? You know what he's saying in that last section? Even a jerk face loves people who love them. But Jesus is calling us to something more. And in fact, we are most like Jesus when we display empathy for our enemies. And when I say enemies, I'm not talking about people we hate. I'm not hopefully talking about people who are trying to kill us. I'm just talking about people who we are on opposite sides of an issue on. You know, there's a guy who has an incredible documentary on Netflix. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. His name is Daryl Davis. And the name of his documentary is Accidental Courtesy. And this guy has an amazing story. This African-American man has actually, for years, been building friendships with members of the Ku Klux Klan. To the point that, at this point, like this robe you see, he's collected 44, 46, something like that, robes of men who, through friendship with him, have left the KKK and have given him their robes as a reward of that. Man, how awesome is that? You want to talk about empathy? This is amazing. If you're looking for something to watch, I highly, highly recommend it. When I watch Daryl Davis and see what he does, I say, I want to be like that man. He's helping me be a better human. He's inspiring me to be a better human. And that's why I would say that of all the meaningful experiences I had in 2017, two stand out as times when I was most like the person I want to be. One, like I said, happened in a cop car. I've been outspoken and vocal about some of the dynamics that have been going on in our country around police and particularly the African-American community. I care deeply about that. And one of the commitments I made in 2017 was to begin a consistent rhythm of doing ride-alongs with police officers. Because if I'm going to understand and be able to relate and connect to the perspective of a police officer, I don't have that perspective. I haven't been a police officer. I'm only going to do that if I choose connection. So I tell you what, I felt great sitting in the car and talking honestly about what it's like to be a police officer. And I'm really fortunate to live in Cincinnati, where we have one of the best police forces. And so I've been spending time with these guys, and I've been learning a lot. In fact, one of the things I knew would be a good sign, I knew this was going to be good when, like, our first stop was Chick-fil-A. We went to the Holy Bird first. I'm like, this is going to be a good day. I just tell you right now, it's going to be a good day. So I've been doing that. And another experience that I had actually about this time last year was at a dinner table where I was the minority at the dinner table, not because of my race, but because of my sexual orientation. And I got a chance to have dinner with members of the LGBTQ community in Cincinnati. And you might not be surprised by this. They had a lot of energy toward me when they found out I was a pastor. And we sat down, and I began to understand why. Because to a person, every story that I heard that day was someone who had been hurt by someone in the church. And I don't mean hurt in a general way. I mean parents who still aren't talking to them, public ridicule, things that I believe would grieve the heart of God. And I'll just tell you, man, as I listened and listened and listened in that dinner, it was a meaningful experience where I said, I want to be this way. I want to be able to engage when there may be opposition on an issue, because I see Jesus doing that, and I believe he empowers us to do that. That's the superpower we have. It's part of what makes us human, is we have the ability to empathize even in situations where it may seem tough. In fact, there's a scripture that I regularly use if I'm doing a wedding. It's one of the ones, my go-to scriptures, because I love how clearly it communicates what should be the case in any relationship where Jesus is at the center. Actually, these words that I'm about to read to you were not written toward a husband and a wife. They were written toward people. They were written toward people in community where Jesus is at the center. And I want to read it from a paraphrase of the Bible called The Message. Colossians chapter 3 says, "So, chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you: compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Be even-tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it." And I love this description of what it means to engage relationally when you have received the love that Jesus offers. And what does he say? I love that he says right up front, dress in the wardrobe that God picked out for you. You know what that means? It means empathy is a choice. We choose it. We put it on like we put on clothes. And we can choose it because we've been chosen by God for a life of love. Empathy is a choice, and I would argue it's a choice that makes you uniquely human. And I believe that we are most empathetic. And by that, I mean I believe that we are most human when we make two choices. First, when we choose to listen. So Colossians 3, in a different version, says, put on compassion, kindness, and humility. And I think compassion, kindness, and humility find a home whenever we give the gift of genuinely listening to another person. If you want to know how can I be compassionate, kind, and humble at the same time, give the gift of listening to someone. especially someone who sees things differently than you. In fact, I would go so far as to say that to listen is to love. One of the best definitions of love I've ever heard, I use it all the time, is that love is ascribing worth to another person at cost to yourself. Now, I got 2 strikes against me when it comes to listening. Number 1, I'm an extrovert. Any extroverts in the house? Right? Like halfway through the sentence, you already know what you want to say, right? You want to respond to me right now? Well, actually, you can do that. I'm cool with that if you want to do that. So, because I'm an extrovert. So, I got that working against me. And then I like to debate. I like a good, like fired up argument. I like that. And so when I'm listening to someone, ascribing worth at cost to myself looks like shutting up. That's what it looks like for me. And it costs. And sometimes I squirm. But when I'm able to offer that, you know what I get? I get space to understand. I get space to understand. Ascribing worth to another person at cost to yourself is what listening is. And without listening, we really can't love. We can't love if we're not listening. And so I want to give us, in the midst of this message, I want to give us like some listening training. You guys up for a little bit of training? I want to give you kind of like 3 practical tips on listening. This is kind of an aside to what I'm saying today, but really important to it. So I wanted to get practical and specific. If I were to kind of distill down that training and what I know about listening from my own experience and learning, I would distill it down to 3 things. Number 1, listening is the opportunity to offer someone warmth, empathy, and respect. When you're listening well, a person should feel warmth, empathy, and respect from you. And so there's a phrase I learned in another training, and I think it just really kind of distills that down. Listen as an ally. What does it look like in any situation, particularly a contentious situation, to listen as an ally? A lot of times when you're listening, it's kind of like eye to eye, and it can feel like it's a competition. But what does it look like to not get eye to eye, but to get shoulder to shoulder? And be like, man, I want to see this from your perspective. I see that. I understand that. To get shoulder to shoulder and say, you're helping me understand your perspective. I'm listening. Powerful, powerful things happen when you do that. Number 2, second practical thing I would say is listening is about the gift of presence. It's about giving the gift of presence. So be present and give space for someone to process. Most of the time, listening is hardest when people are expressing emotion with what they're saying. And so how do we give space for that? How can we be present, I'm engaged, but give space for their emotion? And one of the ways that you can do that is the third thing, which is learn to reflect back in empathy statements when you listen. To reflect back in an empathy statement. You know you're listening when you can do 2 things in this empathy statement. When you can say back, so I hear you say, or I'm understanding 2 things. The main idea of what they're thinking and the emotion connected to what they're thinking. So I'll give you some examples of kind of empathy statements just to kind of help you lock this in. Number 1, I use this one oftentimes with my wife. I'm hearing your anger and disappointment about my missed expectations on this. Because a lot of times I miss her expectations. So I'm hearing her anger and disappointment. I'm telling you, look, the first thing you want to do is defend and give excuses. Sometimes I do that. But when I am listening and reflecting back to her, babe, I understand. You're disappointed because I told you I was going to do one thing and I didn't follow through. Man, that just kind of diffuses the situation. You can also use this when somebody's excited, but maybe kind of concerned about something. So, maybe somebody just told you about a job that they're taking, and they're excited about the job, but man, the timing means they're going to have to be out there and kind of take a financial risk to do this now. And you might say, man, I hear your excitement about that, and you're also uncertain about the timing. And just give space for somebody to kind of process, yeah, that is how I'm feeling about this. Or I'll give you another one. This one is a little bit, specific to people who are in my geography right now. So give me some grace if you're in a different geography other than the Cincinnati area. But one that might be very poignant right now is this one. So you're feeling unheard by Mike Brown, owner of the Bengals, despite your protests. Somebody said amen. That's right. Just to give you some perspective, if you're not from Cincinnati, let's just say that our owner made a coaching decision that has a couple of us confused. We'll just leave it at that. So, but anyway, no matter what though, I tell you what, listening works. Listening works. It diffuses anger. It brings clarity and perspective. It helps a person kind of feel heard and feel connected, and listening connects. And I believe listening is one of the things that embodies what it means to be truly human. And yet there's another aspect by which we show empathy, and it's when we choose not only to listen, but when we actually choose to feel. When we choose to feel. Colossians 3:13 in another version, uses the phrase bearing with one another, which actually can be translated as endure each other. Endure each other. Now, I love how honest the Bible is, right? So this is being written to a group of people who have all identified as followers of Jesus. These are people who you would think, in theory, think the same things, have the same values, right? And yet, the writer who helped plant this church is saying to them, even when you think you get along 100% of the time with a person, guess what? There will be times when you will have to endure that person. And all the married people in the house say, amen, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what you think, how in love you are. There's going to be a level of that. And he doesn't mean here endure like, okay, just stiff arm them and just kind of like, la, 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 la. I'm just going to endure it, la, 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 just a little bit longer. No. He actually means lean in. Lean in and actually engage in that relationship over the long haul. See, there's a difference between some words here, and I want to make sure we're clear on that. So we can think about the difference between these this way. There's pity, there's sympathy, and then there's what we're talking about today, which is empathy. So let's start at the base level. Pity is really just saying, sucks to be you. I'm just glad it's not me. Now, we don't say that. We say things like, oh, poor thing, oh. But we have no interest in doing anything other in that moment, after that moment, than just saying, oh, poor thing, you poor thing. That's pity. Sympathy, on the other hand, sympathy, sim, means beside. It means to feel beside a person. So, oh, I see you're having feelings now. Okay, I see you're having feelings now. Yep. I'm not feeling them, but I see you're having feelings now. Empathy, M-E-M, that means inside. And it means to actually take that person's feelings, like we saw in the animation, and let them be your feelings. By connecting to maybe not that specific situation, but a time when you felt the same way. And thinking through, what did I need in that situation? Man, I'm feeling with you. But feeling with, man, it takes vulnerability. It takes vulnerability to do that. So, I was thinking about this in my own relationship with my wife. This comes up a lot. And actually, this is very timely because it's the wintertime. So, snow days. My kids love snow days. They are so excited when I get to tell them no school today. My kids, anybody else kids like that? Anybody else got kids in their life that love snow days? Like, my kids love snow days. They really do. My wife, not so much. Not so much, especially when the snow days fall on weekdays. She's not necessarily a fan of those snow days because, my kids are like, we don't have to go to school. We get to be home all day. And my wife is like, oh my gosh, the kids don't have to be in school. They're going to be home all day, right? It's a different response there. So at the end, if it happens on a work day, I still have to go to work. So, because we don't have a lot of snow days around Crossroads. So I can come home at the end of a snow day to a wife who needs some empathy. Right? And when I'm at my best as a husband, I can come in and she can say, you have no idea the struggle I have with the kids today. And I can say, I'm hearing some disappointment in terms of how the kids behave today. Let's talk about it. That's an empathetic response. I'm listening, I'm engaged. And sometimes I do that. Sometimes. Once in a while. But there's certainly been days when I come home and it's been a snow day and she's like, you have no idea how difficult it's been with the kids today. And I can just look around the house and say, I can see that. Sympathy, maybe, sympathy. But if I'm honest, and I'm going to go ahead and be honest because I trust all of you, no matter where you are, this is going to stay between you and me, that none of the thousands of you who are listening right now are going to share this with my wife. So I trust you with that, that sometimes it's just pity, right? Sometimes I come in and she says, you have no idea how hard it's been with the kids today. And it's really important that I explain, what I'm about to tell you, I don't actually say. I'm not stupid. I don't say it, but I think it, right? You have no idea how hard it's been with the kids today. Sucks to be you. I'm glad I got to work today and I got to go to work tomorrow. I'm sorry. I'm just being honest with you, right? So, but the thing is, when we choose empathy, it's choosing to be vulnerable. Choosing to feel with. It costs us something, right? What is love? Ascribing worth to another, it costs to yourself. And here's what I want you to know. I think that Brené Brown is right when she says this. She says, empathy is feeling with people because rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. And friends, why are we talking about this in church? Because the most empathetic person who ever walked the planet was Jesus. Jesus took on flesh to feel with you. He took on flesh to bear with you, to understand what it meant to be human. That is unique to the story of Jesus. You will not find a deity in any other walk of faith where the deity was willing to enflesh themselves and limit themselves to the struggle of that for the purposes of connecting with the ones that they had created. That is unique to Jesus. Look at how it's depicted in Hebrews 4:15. It says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, and yet he did not sin." And there's a specific story in Jesus' life that I think just communicates so clearly and powerfully the length to which God goes to empathize with you. I don't know where you are today. I don't know what you believe about God, but I want you to know God wants to come to where you are. He is willing to feel with you. No matter what you're feeling, if you feel doubt toward his existence, he's willing to stand with you and engage with you in your doubt. If you feel anger, if you feel betrayal, if you feel disappointment, he's willing to stand with you in that place, to feel with you because he wants to connect with you. And there's a story in Mark that just depicts this so powerfully. Jesus is being approached by a leper. And it says this in Mark chapter 1, verse 40. It says, "And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, 'If you will, you can make me clean.' Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I will, be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean." I used to read this story and say, "Man, isn't that awesome? Jesus healed a leper." And then I'd move on to the next story. And when I thought about it and slowed down one time when somebody was reflecting on it in my midst, and it was like, man, I never noticed this detail. And this is probably one of my favorite stories of Jesus. So let me give you some context. This man comes to Jesus and he heals. He is imploring him. He wants to be healed. You know why? Because to be a leper in that time meant to be completely separated from human connection. When you had leprosy, for the safety of others and because of the religious rules around it, you had to physically separate from people who didn't have leprosy. This man could have had a wife and kids, but he was not able to ever touch them again, ever physically interact with them again because he was a leper. And he had to spend the entirety of his life with other people who were also isolated. And to make it worse, if he was in a public setting where people without leprosy were getting within a certain level of feet from him, he had to yell out, "I'm unclean, I'm unclean." Man, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt so disconnected that you feel like a leper? Maybe I just don't see this issue like everybody else. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I don't know, but I feel apart. And this man, I believe, wanted to be healed, but I think more than that, he wanted connection. So he begs Jesus for that. And it says Jesus was moved with pity. And that word "moved with" is actually, he's moved with compassion. It's the word splanknon, and it actually means his gut. So he's moved at the gut level to feel with this man. And what's the first thing Jesus does? He stretches out his hand and he touches him. Now, there are places where Jesus healed lepers where he never touched them. He healed 10 lepers. He said, "Just go, clean yourselves." And on the way, they were healed. He did not have to touch this man. I believe Jesus touched this man, though, because he knew that's what this man desperately wanted, was connection. And so I don't know how far you feel from God, but I want you to know Jesus embodies the empathy of God. No matter how distant you are, no matter how like a leper you feel, Jesus comes to you and he comes to me and he touches our hand. And here's what I know. You are created in the image of God, which means you can do the same. You can love people who feel like lepers to you. You can come close to people who you feel like you don't have anything in common with. And it's a superpower that you have because you're a unique human being created in the image of a God who enables you to love when it's difficult to love. And if we become those kind of people, think about the impact that has, not just on us, but on the people around us. Because you know what I got in that cop car? I got connection. And you know what I got around that dinner table? I got connection. And it wasn't a connection I could choose on my own. It was a connection that was enabled by remembering and leaning into how much Jesus extended himself to love me. Because I don't know about you, but I don't always choose empathy. There are times when I do not choose to listen. There are times when I do not choose to feel. But man, when you do, when you choose empathy, you get the gift of connection. Do you realize that babies die without physical contact? And in the same way, no matter how big and bad you think you are, no matter how much of a jerk face you are, you die without connection. You die internally. You die emotionally. And I believe our society is at risk of a death that is worse than even some of the deaths that we can imagine, which is the death of connection, the death of relationships, and specifically the death of a diversity of relationships with people who see the world different than us. And when I look at the Bible, we're just not called to be those kind of people. We're called to be people who love, even when it's difficult. We're called to be people who choose to listen, even when listening is hard. We're called to be the kind of people who choose to feel, even when it's vulnerable. That's who we're called to be, and we're empowered to be that through Jesus. I learned something about reading the Bible. Colossians 3:12 says, "So, chosen by God for this new life of love." Simple lesson I learned, somebody taught me, is whenever you see the word "so" or "therefore" in the Bible, you should see what the "there" is for. You should see what came before. And what comes before these words are 2 chapters beautifully written that include these words. Colossians 1:21 through 23 says, "You yourselves are a case study of what He, God, does. At one time, you all had your backs turned to God, thinking rebellious thoughts of Him, giving Him trouble every chance you got. But now, by giving Himself completely at the cross, actually dying for you, Christ brought you over to God's side. You don't walk away from a gift like that. You stay grounded and steady in that bond of trust." So, the more that I am gripped by Jesus' love for me, the more it enables me to have the superpower to love you. And the more that you are gripped by how much Jesus loves you, it enables you to have the superpower to love me.